The boardroom was a fortress of glass and steel, every surface polished to reflect power. At the head of the long table stood Victoria, the CEO, her voice sharp and deliberate. "Daniel, your services are no longer needed." The words cut through the room like broken glass. Colleagues froze, some shifted uncomfortably, others lowered their eyes, unwilling to meet his. Daniel sat still, hands folded, the quiet dignity of a man refusing to break in public. Victoria didn't stop there. She listed his failures in front of everyone, her tone mocking, her gaze unwavering. The cardboard box placed beside him sealed his fate, the corporate symbol of exile. As Daniel rose, the weight of humiliation pressed against his chest, but he said nothing. A silent storm brewed in his eyes. And then a narrator's voice. Sometimes the tables turn in ways no one sees coming. The silence that followed Victoria's declaration was suffocating. Chairs creaked as colleagues shifted uncomfortably, pens clicked nervously against notepads. No one dared to speak. All eyes were on Daniel, some with pity, some with relief it wasn't them, and a few with the detached curiosity of spectators at a public execution. Victoria leaned forward, her manicured fingers tapping the mahogany table. "Frankly, Daniel, your methods are outdated. You've been dragging this team backward while the rest of us are pushing forward. In a company like this, there's no room for dead weight." The words landed like blows. Daniel's throat tightened, but he remained seated, hands folded neatly in his lap, like a man holding himself together by sheer will. He could have argued, defended his years of loyalty, reminded her of the late nights and the weekends sacrificed. But he didn't. "Security," Victoria called, without even looking at him. "Make sure he collects his things and leaves immediately." The motion was swift. A junior assistant slid a cardboard box across the table, the kind everyone recognized. The symbol of dismissal, stripped identity in corrugated paper. Daniel's nameplate, pens, and family photo were shoved in as if they carried no more weight than paper clips. The cruelest part wasn't her words. It was the way Victoria smiled faintly at the investors seated near the end of the table, as if firing him was just another display of her efficiency, a performance of strength. The message was clear. This is how I run my empire. No hesitation, no weakness. Daniel rose slowly, shoulders straight despite the invisible weight pressing down on him. He picked up the box with careful hands, almost reverent, as though it contained not just his belongings but the last fragments of his dignity. He turned to leave. No one stopped him. A few colleagues avoided his gaze, pretending to shuffle papers. One whispered, "I'm sorry," too soft to be heard. Another muttered, "He didn't deserve that." The hallway outside felt longer than usual, a corridor of judgment. Glass walls on either side reflected his figure, each reflection carrying the cardboard box, multiplying his shame like endless mirrors in a carnival of cruelty. Employees stood in clusters, whispering. Some shook their heads, others offered sympathetic glances. But no one stepped forward. No one dared to side with the man already marked as disposable. Daniel walked with measured steps, head held high. He refused to let his shoulders sag, refused to let them see the crack in his spirit. Inside, however, the sting was sharp, not because he had lost a job, but because his worth had been reduced to nothing in the eyes of the woman who led them. As he reached the elevator, a young intern darted in, holding the door. I'm sorry, Mr. Daniel," the intern stammered. Daniel managed a faint smile and nodded, but his voice failed him. The elevator doors closed, and in that mirrored capsule, Daniel finally allowed his jaw to tremble. He looked down at the photo of Emma, his daughter, peeking out from the box, her smile radiant, untouched by corporate cruelty. He whispered softly, "We'll be okay, sweetheart." The elevator dinged. The doors opened to the bustling city below. Rain streaked across the glass facade of the skyscraper, as though the building itself shed tears for the man it had just expelled. With steady steps, Daniel walked out into the storm, cardboard box pressed against his chest. Each raindrop washed away a layer of humiliation, but not yet the ache in his heart. Behind him, high above the street, Victoria returned to her meeting, her voice sharp once again. She believed she had closed a chapter. Little did she know the story was only beginning. The rain followed Daniel home like a shadow. By the time he pushed open the creaky door of his modest apartment, his shirt clung to him, the cardboard box damp at the edges. He set it gently on the small kitchen table, the same table where countless bills had been spread, where every decision had been weighed against survival. "Dad," a soft voice called from the hallway. Emma appeared, her hair tied messily in a bun, her oversized hoodie slipping off one shoulder. At 15, she was still more girl than woman, but her eyes, her mother's eyes, carried a wisdom beyond her years. Daniel forced a smile. "Hey, sweetheart, you're still up." She frowned, glancing at the box. "They let you go, didn't they?" For a moment, he wanted to shield her, to pretend everything was fine. But Emma had grown up watching him juggle 2 jobs, nodding off at the kitchen counter with a pen still in his hand. She could see through pretense. He sighed, pulling out a chair. "Yeah, they did." Emma crossed the room and hugged him tightly, resting her head against his chest. The hug reminded him of her as a toddler, clutching his finger with tiny hands after her mother's funeral. He'd been both father and mother ever since. Every shift he picked up, every dream he postponed, every gray hair that arrived too soon, it was all for her. After dinner, simple reheated pasta, Daniel spread her math homework across the table. He leaned over the equations, patient and steady. "See, if you break it into smaller parts, it's not so scary," he explained, sketching numbers on the margin. Emma rolled her eyes playfully, but her smile betrayed her comfort. The truth was, Daniel had once loved numbers more than anything. He had been on track to become an engineer. Drafting blueprints, sketching circuits, solving problems, it had all thrilled him. But when Emma's mother fell ill, tuition money became hospital bills, and his future became survival. Engineering remained a dream folded away in an old notebook, replaced by late-night shifts, janitorial work, and long commutes. Yet his gift never left him. If something broke in the apartment building, a leaky faucet, a sputtering heater, even a toaster that refused to work, Daniel would fix it. He carried a quiet genius, one that never demanded recognition, only usefulness. Emma often teased, "Dad, you can fix everything except burnt toast." He'd laugh, grateful for the levity. That night after Emma went to bed, Daniel lingered by her door. He watched her sleep, a strand of hair across her cheek, breathing steady and safe. In that moment, the humiliation of the day seemed smaller. His world wasn't the glass towers of CEOs. His world was here, 4 walls, a teenage girl, and the promise he had made to her late mother. She will never feel alone. Daniel closed her door softly and whispered into the darkness, "We'll be okay, Emma, I promise." Far above the rain-soaked streets, Victoria's penthouse glowed like a jewel in the skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city beneath her, its chaos muted by glass and altitude. Inside, everything gleamed, marble counters, leather chairs, designer suits hung in meticulous rows. Victoria stepped out of her heels, tossing them carelessly near the door. Another late night, another victory claimed. She had fired Daniel without hesitation, and in her world, hesitation was weakness. Efficiency was her armor, control her currency. She poured herself a glass of wine and sank into the silence. Her phone buzzed on the counter. A name flashed across the screen, Ethan, her son. She hesitated, thumb hovering. Then with a sigh, she silenced the call. The ache it left was sharper than she wanted to admit. Their last conversation had ended in slammed words and a door shut too hard. Work had always come first, and Ethan had learned to live without waiting for her. Victoria leaned back, staring at the ceiling. The glass of wine stood half empty on the counter, untouched now, a symbol of comfort she no longer felt. For all her victories, her life echoed with absence. The accolades, the promotions, the corner office, they filled her resume but left her home hollow. Still, she carried on. She straightened her blazer, checked her reflection in the mirror, and tightened her ponytail. Tomorrow was crucial. a board presentation that could redefine her company's future. Investors demanded innovation, and she had promised results. There was no room for distraction, no space for weakness. She gathered her notes, her laptop glowing with financial graphs and projections. Her penthouse felt less like a home and more like an extension of her office. Every surface was spotless, every corner curated, but the silence between was deafening. With a sharp inhale, she forced the crack in her composure shut. She was Victoria Sterling, the woman who never faltered, never apologized, never looked back. That was the image the world saw. And yet, as the storm outside lashed against the glass, a whisper of loneliness crept in. She ignored it, slipping her presentation into her briefcase. There was no time for emotions. There was only business. Tomorrow the board would see her strength, or so she thought. The storm rolled in without warning. Sheets of rain hammered the windshield of the sleek black sedan as it cut through the city's financial district. Inside, Victoria adjusted her notes, skimming through slides on her tablet. The dinner tonight wasn't just a formality. It was the kind of meeting that could lock in millions in investor capital, the kind of event that reinforced her image as untouchable. Her chauffeur squinted through the downpour, wipers thrashing wildly. Suddenly, a sharp sputter came from the engine. The dashboard lights flickered. Then, silence. The car coasted to a stop beneath a flickering streetlight. "What is happening?" Victoria snapped, glancing up from her screen. "Ma'am, I don't know," the chauffeur stammered, twisting the key. The engine only coughed, refusing to ignite. Rain battered the car roof like impatient knuckles. Victoria checked her watch. "Call roadside assistance. We cannot be late." "Yes, ma'am," the driver dialed, speaking frantically into his phone. A moment later, he looked back at her, face pale. "They said the storm has all units tied up. The earliest someone can get here is 2 hours." 2 hours, her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Do you have any idea what's at stake tonight?" The driver shrank into his seat. Victoria exhaled sharply, her perfectly composed schedule unraveling before her eyes. For a woman who had spent her life controlling every variable, this chaos felt unbearable. And then, through the streaks of rain on the window, she saw him. A lone figure trudging down the street, shoulders hunched against the storm, a small umbrella turned useless by the wind. His clothes clung to him, and under his arm he shielded a cardboard box with a jacket. The sight was almost biblical, a man carrying the weight of his life in a storm. "Daniel." Victoria's stomach knotted. She blinked, certain it must be coincidence, but fate rarely asks for permission. He passed the sedan without a glance, focused on the ground before him. Her pride screamed to stay silent, but desperation silenced pride. She lowered the window. "Daniel." He stopped. Slowly he turned, rain dripping from his hair. Recognition flashed across his face, followed by a quiet ache. He said nothing. "Our car, it's broken down," Victoria said, forcing steadiness into her voice. "We need help." Daniel studied her, his expression unreadable. He could have kept walking. No one would blame him. After all, just hours earlier she had stripped him of dignity in front of an entire room. But as he looked at her, another voice echoed in his memory, Emma's, bright and firm. "Dad, kindness is who we are, even when people don't deserve it." With a small sigh, Daniel set down his soaked box beneath the awning of a shop. He rolled up his sleeves and crouched beside the sedan, rain pooling around him. His hands moved with confidence, prying open the hood, inspecting the engine. Victoria stepped out, clutching her umbrella. The storm splattered against her designer suit, each drop a reminder of how vulnerable she suddenly was. She stood awkwardly above him, powerless, watching the man she had called dead weight kneel in the mud to save her evening. "Do you even know what you're doing?" she asked, voice sharp but softer now. Daniel glanced up briefly, rain dripping from his brow. "I used to study engineering," he replied simply, before returning to the tangle of wires and metal. His voice carried no bitterness, no triumph, just fact. The chauffeur hovered helplessly, offering a flashlight. Daniel took it without a word, improvising with tools from the trunk. His movements were precise, steady, almost instinctive, the kind of skill born from both knowledge and necessity. Minutes stretched like hours. Victoria shifted her weight, uncomfortable with the reversal. For once, she wasn't the one in control. For once, her fate rested in the hands of the man she had discarded. Finally, Daniel tightened one last bolt, wiped his muddy hands against his soaked trousers, and closed the hood. He looked at the chauffeur. "Try it now." The driver slid into the seat, turned the key. The engine coughed, then roared to life. The headlights pierced through the storm, casting a halo around Daniel as if the night itself acknowledged his triumph. Victoria stared at him, her throat dry. The man she had humiliated had just salvaged her evening with quiet brilliance. And for the first time in years, she felt something unfamiliar stir inside her chest: humility. She opened her mouth to speak, but the words caught, tangled between pride and gratitude. Daniel simply picked up his box, adjusted his jacket, and turned to walk back into the storm. Victoria's voice broke through the rain. "Wait." The storm didn't relent. If anything, it grew harsher, as though the heavens themselves had conspired to stage the scene. Victoria stood rigidly under her umbrella, the storm dripping down its edges onto her immaculate heels. Every detail of her image, the tailored blazer, the diamond watch, looked fragile against the downpour. Meanwhile, Daniel was on his knees in the mud, hands blackened with grease, face streaked with rain. The cardboard box that held his life's remnants sat on the sidewalk, sagging under the weight of water. Yet there was no bitterness in his movements. His focus was absolute, his patience unshaken. Victoria couldn't stop staring. Hours ago, she had labeled him obsolete. Yet here he was, improvising with a flathead screwdriver and the car's own emergency kit, coaxing life back into the machine her chauffeur couldn't even comprehend. Every twist of his hand was a silent rebuke to her arrogance. Pedestrians began to notice. The car, a sleek, foreign luxury sedan, drew curious eyes as people hurried by with umbrellas. A small group paused under the shelter of a bus stop, whispering as they watched the scene unfold. Their expressions said everything. The powerful CEO, helpless in the rain, while the man she had fired knelt in the gutter to save her. The symbolism was unmistakable. Victoria shifted uncomfortably, hyper-aware of the audience. She had always thrived on appearances, dominance in the boardroom, grace at galas, command in every negotiation. But this was a picture she could not control. Here, she was not the conqueror but the dependent, reliant on the very man she had diminished. Daniel's voice broke through her thoughts. "Pass me that wrench," he said simply, pointing to the open trunk. Her chauffeur scrambled to obey, but Victoria hesitated a second longer than she should have. The absurdity stung. She was being directed by the man she'd cast aside. Yet she handed over the tool, her manicured fingers brushing his rough ones for the briefest instant. The contact jolted her, not unpleasant, but unsettling. Minutes crawled by. The storm raged, the onlookers whispered, and the CEO of Sterling Enterprises stood powerless. Finally, Daniel tightened one last connection, his motions confident, efficient. He stepped back, wiping his hands on his already ruined trousers. "Try it now," he said evenly. The chauffeur slid into the driver's seat, turned the ignition, and the engine roared back to life. The headlights pierced through the storm, illuminating Daniel in their beam. Gasps of approval rippled from the crowd. Someone even clapped. Victoria's throat tightened. She had no choice now. The scene demanded it. The eyes of strangers weighed heavy on her. She swallowed hard, then spoke the words she had not uttered in years, perhaps decades. "Thank you." Her voice was quiet at first, nearly drowned by the rain. But Daniel heard it. He looked up, his eyes calm, almost weary. He didn't gloat, didn't smirk, didn't wield her gratitude as a weapon. Instead, he nodded once, a gesture so humble, so dignified, that it cut deeper than any revenge could have. Victoria felt something foreign twist inside her chest. Shame. Not for being stranded, not for being watched, but for realizing how small she had been. Daniel had every reason to walk past, every right to leave her drowning in her own arrogance. Instead, he chose kindness. The crowd began to disperse, but the moment was seared into her mind. For the first time in her career, power did not belong to her. It belonged to a man with muddy hands and a drenched cardboard box. And she would never forget it. The car purred steadily now, headlights blazing through the storm like two unwavering eyes. The crowd had thinned, their whispers fading into the rain. Yet for Victoria, the world felt louder than ever. Every drop of water seemed to pound against her pride. Each flash of lightning a reminder of the humiliation she had tried to outrun. Daniel reached for his box, lifting it carefully from the curb. The cardboard sagged, its edges frayed, but he cradled it with the tenderness of someone who knew its worth, not in dollars, but in memories, in survival. Victoria's chest tightened. She couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The image of this man, the man she had reduced to obsolete, saving her in silence, burned into her. Her legs buckled before she realized what was happening. "Daniel," her voice cracked. The umbrella slipped from her fingers. She sank, knees hitting the wet pavement with a thud that reverberated louder than any boardroom gavel. Gasps rose from the few stragglers still watching. The sight was unthinkable. Victoria Sterling, the untouchable CEO, kneeling in the mud before a man she had publicly humiliated. Tears cut tracks through her rain-soaked face. Her hands trembled as she pressed them together, not in prayer but in surrender. "I was wrong," she whispered, her voice raw, stripped of polish. "I treated you like you were nothing. I forgot that dignity, that humanity, matters more than power." Daniel froze, box in hand, his eyes wide with disbelief. For a moment, he almost didn't recognize her. The towering figure of arrogance had vanished. In her place knelt a woman laid bare by regret. He set the box down and stepped closer, the storm softening as if to honor the moment. Slowly, he reached down, his calloused hand extending toward her. Victoria looked up, eyes shimmering with headlights and tears. Daniel's voice was low, steady, carrying a weight that silenced the night. "It's not about me," he said gently. "It's about the choices we make when we think no one's watching." The words pierced deeper than any rebuke. They weren't meant to wound, but to remind, to anchor her in a truth she had forgotten. Victoria's sobs shook her shoulders. For years she had believed power was everything. Tonight, drenched in rain and kneeling before the man she had cast aside, she realized how wrong she had been. Daniel reached down, helping her to her feet. Their hands locked for a moment, the image etched in light and shadow. A man who had lost everything but dignity, and a woman who had everything but had forgotten her soul. The rain fell harder, washing mud from her knees, streaking away mascara, cleansing pride like a baptism. In that moment, the storm didn't feel like punishment. It felt like renewal. Days later, the storm was only a memory, but its impact lingered. Sterling Enterprises headquarters buzzed with speculation, whispers of what had happened on that rain-soaked night. Victoria had said nothing publicly. She didn't need to. Change was already in motion. When Daniel walked back into the glass-walled boardroom, it wasn't with a cardboard box in his hands. It was with his head held high, invited this time, not dismissed. The same employees who had watched his humiliation now rose from their chairs, stunned into silence. Victoria stood at the front, her voice steady but warmer than anyone had ever heard. "This company prides itself on innovation," she began. "But true innovation doesn't just come from technology or markets. It comes from people who see solutions where others see problems. People like Daniel." Gasps rippled. She turned to him, gesturing not to a chair at the far end of the table, but to the seat beside her. "From today, Daniel is not returning as an employee. He's joining me as a partner on our new engineering initiative, one that will shape our future." For the first time in years, Daniel's old dream, the one he had shelved for responsibility, for survival, for Emma, had a platform. He wasn't being given charity. He was being recognized, honored. That evening, Emma sat in the front row of a company event, eyes shining as she watched her father on stage. The spotlight bathed him not as a man discarded, but as a man restored. She leaned forward, whispering to herself, "That's my dad." Victoria stood nearby, her applause genuine, her expression softened. The experience had cracked her armor, revealing something long buried. She made a silent vow that night to rebuild not only her company with humanity, but her family as well. Later, she would call her son again, this time not with control, but with humility. For Daniel, the partnership meant more than professional recognition. It meant Emma could see what dignity and perseverance looked like when honored. For Victoria, it meant rediscovering that leadership was not about fear, but about respect. Their arcs had collided in the rain, and from that collision, transformation was born. The story was too powerful to stay hidden. A passerby's phone had captured the moment, the CEO of Sterling Enterprises, kneeling in the rain before a man she had fired only hours earlier. The clip hit social media within hours, and by morning it was everywhere. News outlets replayed it with captions like, "Humility in the storm and the night power bowed to dignity." Inside the company, the whispers were electric. Employees who had once feared Victoria's sharp tongue now looked at her with new eyes. Some were skeptical, others inspired, but all of them were changed. Meetings took on a different tone. Mid-level managers began listening more closely to their teams. The culture of fear that had quietly shadowed the halls started to give way to something softer, something human. At the board level, conversations shifted too. A director who once pushed for relentless cost-cutting asked, almost sheepishly, "Are we valuing the right things?" Another added, "Maybe leadership isn't just about numbers." For the first time, they began to see that compassion could be a corporate strength, not a liability. And then there was the world outside those glass walls. The viral video sparked debate across the internet. Comment sections filled with stories of unfair firings, of overlooked janitors, of workers who carried quiet dignity while corporations ignored them. Daniel became a symbol, not of revenge, but of respect. A man who refused to let humiliation define him, who answered cruelty with kindness, and whose decency brought a titan of industry to her knees. For Emma, the impact was deeply personal. At school, she had long endured the subtle sting of being the girl whose dad was always tired, always working extra shifts. But now, her classmates approached her differently. "Your dad's the guy from that video, right?" one asked with wide-eyed admiration. Emma beamed with pride. For the first time, her father wasn't just her hero in the quiet of their home, he was everyone's hero. The ripple spread further still. Churches, community groups, even leadership seminars referenced the Sterling story as a modern parable. Hashtags trended, "Dignity first, #leadership with heart." The world seemed hungry for the reminder that kindness mattered, that true strength was not in domination but in humility. And while Daniel remained humble, still fixing appliances at home with Emma, still walking the same streets, his story carried weight far beyond him. It had cracked something open in the collective consciousness, the idea that a single act of grace could bend even the coldest structures of power. Victoria, too, felt the ripple daily. Every handshake, every introduction now came with an unspoken acknowledgement. She was the CEO who had kneeled. But instead of shame, she carried it as a badge of transformation. Because in the end, it wasn't about the humiliation. It was about what came after. The storm had ended, but its memory lingered like a watermark on the soul. In the glow of streetlights and the softened hum of the city, the story of a single night began to ripple outward, not just through boardrooms or classrooms, but through the hearts of those who heard it. And in the hush of that aftermath, the narrator's voice settles in. Power can fire someone, but only humility can make you kneel. It is a truth that slices through the noise of ambition and ego, piercing directly to what lasts. For most of us, life seems to be a ladder. We climb rung after rung, gripping tightly to titles, salaries, possessions, the perception of success. But the ladder is fragile. It can be knocked down in an instant. A slip, a market crash, a decision made by someone else, and suddenly the walls of certainty collapse. Victoria knew that ladder well. She had lived her life climbing it faster than anyone else. Her title CEO was her armor, her proof that she mattered. Yet in one storm, on one rain-drenched street, the title meant nothing. It couldn't fix a broken car. It couldn't shield her from the eyes of the crowd. It couldn't teach her how to stand with grace when her own pride brought her to her knees. Titles fade, offices empty, plaques gather dust. But character is what lingers. Daniel, in contrast, had no grand title, no sprawling penthouse, no board of directors waiting for his command. What he had was dignity, the kind earned through long nights at a kitchen table, guiding his daughter through algebra, through broken appliances mended with patient hands, through quiet sacrifices no one applauded. He had been humiliated, yes, cast out with nothing but a cardboard box and whispered pity. But when he saw someone in need, even someone who had wronged him, he didn't turn away. He bent his knees to the mud, not in shame, but in service. There is a power in that kind of humility, a power that cannot be stripped away by pink slips or public scorn, the kind of power that endures. And that night the world saw that power. Sometimes the greatest wisdom doesn't come from the boardroom, but from the words of a child. Emma's voice echoed in Daniel's heart as he approached the stranded luxury car. "Dad, kindness is who we are, even when people don't deserve it." In that moment, Daniel wasn't just fixing an engine. He was honoring a lesson about identity, about refusing to let bitterness dictate who you become. Emma's words were a lantern in the storm, and Daniel carried that light forward. And the irony, the beauty is this. While Victoria once saw him as outdated, irrelevant, a man with nothing left to give, his example became a guidepost for her own transformation. The obsolete worker became the teacher. The dismissed became the redeemer. Humility is often mistaken for weakness. But what happened that night told a different story. When Victoria fell to her knees, the world gasped. It was a moment captured, replayed, analyzed. To some, it looked like surrender. To others, it looked like shame. But in truth, it was courage. It takes courage to admit you were wrong. It takes courage to bow when your whole life has been about standing taller than everyone else. It takes courage to trade pride for humanity. Victoria's kneeling was not the end of her authority. It was the beginning of her leadership. Because leadership without humility is nothing more than control, and control crumbles. The video of that night went viral because people recognized themselves in it. The worker who felt unseen, the boss who had once chosen pride over compassion, the daughter who longed to see her father honored. Every share, every comment, every whispered conversation at a workplace coffee machine revealed something deeper, a hunger for stories that remind us of who we want to be. And so Daniel's choice became more than a single act of kindness. It became a mirror, a reminder that every one of us in our own storms has the chance to define ourselves not by what is taken from us, but by what we give. Emma's pride in her father wasn't just about one night. It was about the life he had lived, the values he had embodied, the truth that dignity, even unrecognized, carries weight. How many of us have been dismissed, overlooked, told we weren't enough? Maybe it was a boss, maybe a partner, maybe even the quiet voice of doubt within ourselves. But Daniel's story whispers back. Every dismissal hides a chance for redemption. Not always in the form of a viral moment, not always with cameras flashing or CEOs kneeling. Sometimes redemption looks quieter, a new path discovered, a small kindness that shifts a heart, the silent knowledge that your worth is not defined by those who fail to see it. And in that truth, there is freedom. At its heart, this is not just a story about one man and one woman. It is about us, about humanity, about the fragile, beautiful, painful intersections of pride and grace, power and humility. It reminds us that every single interaction carries weight. That cruelty can wound, yes, but kindness can heal in ways we cannot measure. That one act of service, one moment of humility, can ripple outward, changing not just two lives, but entire cultures. We are all Daniels at times, carrying boxes filled with rejection. And we are all Victorias at times, blinded by pride until life forces us to see. The question is, when the storm comes, which choice will we make? The camera closes not on a boardroom or a stage, but on something simpler. Daniel and Emma walking home side by side. No cardboard box, no corporate spotlight, just a father and daughter hand in hand, dignity intact. And the narrator leaves us with words meant not just to end a story, but to stay with us long after the screen fades. In the end, it isn't the titles we hold or the wealth we gather that people remember. It's the humanity we show. A fired worker, a humbled CEO, a storm that washed away pride to reveal what truly matters, kindness. The screen fades to black, silence, and then slowly the weight of the story settles into the heart of every viewer.